Welcome to Accommodate This. In recent months, there has been a debate between meritocracy and DEI, which stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. A meritocracy is when power is granted to people who are selected on the basis of their ability. And diversity, equity, and inclusion is intended to ensure that marginalized members of the community are not denied opportunities that are afforded to the majority. This country, the United States, is somewhat divided with conservatives on the right who favor meritocracy and liberals on the left who favor DEI. Now, both sides of the debate are arguing for what they believe is fair access to opportunities. So if they want the same thing, why is there such a debate? And what does this have to do with neurodiversity? That's what I'd like to discuss today. So now that you know why we're here, let's get into the topic for this video: DEI versus meritocracy. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, these are three concepts that together echo the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's clear that equity is a common theme between the Declaration of Independence and DEI. But what about diversity and inclusion? Let's quickly run through each of these concepts one at a time. Diversity is about acknowledging and respecting the differences in all of us. Our founding fathers designed our Constitution so none of our differences would keep us from achieving the American dream, where anyone can achieve greatness if we put our minds to it. And that freedom is a prerequisite for meritocracy. If you keep opportunities from people, they cannot achieve success by their merits or otherwise. Then there's equity, which some may think is the opposite of diversity, but it's not. Equity is about leveling the playing field by eliminating the barriers that have marginalized various groups of people. It's not about ignoring or eliminating our differences and giving everyone the same resources. It's about recognizing we all start from different places and ensuring we all have access to the resources we need in order to achieve success. Some people may need more help than others, and that's okay. Ensuring access is not hindered, we enable people to achieve their fullest potential. So, in that way, equity enables meritocracy. And finally, we have inclusion, which is about ensuring we all feel a sense of belonging, that we are valued and our voices are heard. We may not all agree, but that's okay. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing situation. We can find diplomatic ways for all of us to live in harmony. But that can only happen if we are willing to listen to one another. Now, I want to be clear. This does not mean entertaining nonsense. Sometimes people will express an opinion purely to make themselves seem morally good or virtuous, and therefore morally superior. That is the opposite of inclusion. That is deceit at the expense of excluding all others. That is what we call virtue signaling. As dishonest as it is to misrepresent another person's position for your own advantage, it's also dishonest to misrepresent yourself for your own advantage. Both DEI and meritocracy only work if we are honest with ourselves and each other. With that said, throughout human history, people seeking power have suppressed the rights of others in order to seem superior. And to this day, men are still paid roughly 17% more than women. Whites are paid roughly 33% more than blacks. Cisgendered citizens are paid roughly 32% more than transgendered citizens. Disabled citizens are twice as likely to live below the poverty line as non-disabled persons. And on and on and on. People in this country use a lot of divisive reasoning to secure favor and opportunity for themselves. And this is why we need to make a conscious effort to include everyone. Now, in order to truly understand the concept of diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's important to understand representation. Now, I'm going to use race for this example, but you can categorize people based on any shared trait, such as earning level, gender, age, geographical region, and so on. I have charted the various ethnicities in our country based on data from the 2024 census. As you can see, the two largest wedges combined are for white citizens, who account for about 75% of the population in the United States. The next biggest wedge is for Hispanic and Latino citizens, which account for about 11% of the population. Then we have Black citizens, accounting for roughly 8%, followed by Asians at 3%, people with multiple races at 2%, American Indians and Alaska Natives at 1%, and everyone else making up less than 1%. We would say that this chart is representative of the various races in this country. Now, if you chart the estimated graduation rates for 2028 Harvard graduates, you may get a chart like this. The largest wedge suggests Asians, accounting for 37% of graduates, are more likely to graduate from Harvard than any other race. Since these are estimates for future graduations, they aren't established numbers, but for this example, they will suffice. Comparing these charts to one another, we can see the Harvard chart does not show the same distribution of racial groups as the census chart. Therefore, we would say it is not representative of the ethnic distribution we see across the country. Now, if the wedges matched, we would say that it was representative of the larger population. See how that works? So at an initial glance, these charts would suggest someone at Harvard admissions is a bit biased in favor of Asians. But really, that would be a faulty conclusion for us to reach. The chart does not explain why there is a difference between the races of future graduates versus races in the general greater population. And there could be another very logical explanation. Perhaps the Harvard chart does represent the population in Massachusetts, where Harvard is located. And don't forget that not everyone is applying to Harvard. There are other colleges to choose from, and some people may decide not to go to college at all. And basically, we would have to dig deeper to understand why the percentages at Harvard suggest Asians are more likely to put in the work to merit a degree. However, the concept of DEI is about making sure there are no biases in play. It's about making sure the distribution of opportunities are representative of the greater population, and that systemic barriers are neutralized as much as possible. DEI does this by ensuring underrepresented groups are not completely discounted and ignored. It would be easy to see this approach as a form of discrimination, but that would be short-sighted. For instance, opponents of DEI may suggest if there's only space for one more student to enroll at Harvard, but there are two students left to consider, it should come down to their merit, not their ethnicity. Now, critics of DEI often concoct hypothetical situations like this to twist the facts in order to support their position. But both sides of the debate agree that race should not be the only factor for deciding eligibility for enrollment, and that merit should play the largest role. However, what if both applicants are equally qualified? What if both applicants have the same stellar grades, the same extracurricular achievements, and so on? Basically, when applicants are equal across all other factors, it comes down to the discretion of the people in charge of enrollment. And I would hope they take their role seriously and thoughtfully consider all options, ignoring arbitrary traits like race. But in reality, biases may be difficult to recognize even in ourselves. It may be in everyone's best interest to look through their enrollment history and see if maybe they have been biased toward one group over another. And DEI simply suggests we become more aware and take steps to avoid bias. And this should be our approach whenever we are making decisions that can impact a person's access to basic securities, such as access to goods and services. In my videos on the history of disability benefits in the United States, I talked about how this has changed over time for the disabled community. For example, requiring public accommodations like wheelchair access and disabled parking, requiring realtors to give equal consideration to potential tenants, whether disabled or not, accommodations in the workplace, and more. Clothing, education, food, nutrition, healthcare, and housing. These are basic necessities without which a person may become ill, endangered, or die, and yet none of these are a guarantee in this country. Despite our enormous wealth, many people still go hungry, many people are homeless, many people can't afford to clothe themselves or their children, many can't afford a good education, and many people do not have reliable or consistent healthcare coverage. Occupation and income. Considering that 85% of autistics are unemployed or underemployed, we are at risk of not having an income, which leads to poverty, homelessness, hunger, disease, and crime. This disparity in employment drags down the value of communities and affects the safety of us all. Physical safety and social acceptance. Well, without social acceptance, we are often denied protection from law enforcement. A couple months ago, I posted a video that talked about autism and the criminal justice system, which showed how we are often targets of criminals and wrongfully accused of criminal behavior. This impacts our personal safety as well as our standing in the communities where we live, and our access to employment, and so on. Without reliable transportation, it may be harder for a person to find and retain employment. In my video on mood disorders, I discussed how a lack of reliable transportation impacts a disabled person's ability to access goods and services, including healthcare. And modern society is structured around our ability to get around, and if that's hindered, as it is for many disabled people, it can impact all our other securities. So if you want to guarantee access to basic securities, regardless of race, gender, age, and so on, that's fantastic. Make it happen and hold yourself to account in that effort. At the same time, recognize that lawmakers have to address the lowest common denominator, and not everyone is interested in fairness when they have clear advantages. Without some level of enforcement, or even just setting the bar, there are people who will exploit their advantages, even if it means destroying opportunities for others. Now, just look at our history. The people having the best time are fully abled, straight, white, cisgendered males with lots of money. Our history is spattered with examples of denying opportunities to women, people of various ethnic backgrounds and national origins, members of the LGBTQ community, the disabled, the elderly, atheists, Muslims, the needy, and so on. Despite what is said in the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal, this country has been notoriously bad at guaranteeing equal access to basic securities. And instead, we have continually marginalized segments of the population in order for a few to gain some sort of advantage. And it's been celebrated as if it indicates those few are actually better than those they stepped on to gain those advantages. Now, I know it isn't easy. Fairness is not a simple equation, especially when there's so much diversity in this country. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't strive for it. And none of us should be penalized or kept from succeeding simply because of factors beyond our control. For instance, age, disability, ethnicity, gender identity, genetics, national origin, neurology, pedigree, physical traits, sensitivities, sexual orientation, and trauma. No one should be placed above or below another person because of our personal differences. This is why most laws prohibit discrimination based on these personal traits. And unfortunately, these qualities are not valued in the same way by everyone. Modern conservatives have a particularly exclusive idea of who is worthy of opportunity based on a narrow view of these traits, as they clearly stated in the Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise, also known as Project 2025. For example, pages 283 to 284 claim that HHS and Biden subsidized single mothers and penalized marriages by focusing on LGBTQ plus issues. Of course, they don't mean gay marriages because this document was written by Christian conservatives, and the Christian God doesn't recognize gay marriages. They also claim here and on page 460 that abortions should not be allowed because of the outlandish belief that aborted baby parts are being used for human-animal experiments, among other experiments. Page 336 suggests rescinding any race or ethnic regulations in the identification, placement, and discipline of students with disabilities. These regulations were put in place because those with a racial bias were keeping people from being placed or would be used to target those individuals. Removing these regulations would open us back up to the times when racial profiling was running wild. We've already proven we are terrible at being fair in this regard, so these regulations are doing a lot of good. Pages 452 to 456 suggest it's wrong to shut down churches during a pandemic, as if people's lives are less important than the right to gather for worship. They also suggest using the rhythm method and calendar method to help avoid unwanted pregnancies. I find it interesting that they put these two things together, almost like they prefer to do family planning around the priest's schedule. This is just one of the many ways they push against abortions, but at least they had a carve out for ectopic pregnancies. Pages 462 to 465 claim that the NIH violated federal civil rights laws by focusing on the #MeToo movement and suggests ending woke DEI policies and actions, junk gender science, and gender-affirming care. Don't they know their hair implants and their wives' boob jobs are considered gender-affirming care? And they are echoing this in the big, beautiful bill that Trump is trying to pass. Pages 474 to 475 claim trans people should be denied gender-affirming care, and that accepting trans people is essentially defining a new class of people with extra privileges. The truth is, they are carving them out as a class of people that don't deserve care that is promised to cisgender people all the time. I guess conservatives want all that gender-affirming care for themselves. Page 475 also suggests low-income families who rely on CHIP should not be coerced, pressured, or otherwise encouraged to embrace this ideologically motivated sexualization of their children. This is their reaction to laws prohibiting discrimination against gender, gender identity, sex, and sexual orientation. And the list goes on. While the conservative, merit-based crowd is pushing for more discrimination and fewer rights for anyone not like them, they are fighting against the original cause of meritocracy. After all, it should not matter whether someone is of a different race, gender, sexual orientation, or what have you. We all deserve the same rights and equal access to opportunities. Meritocracy promises success for those who work for it, but what Christian conservatives are going for are special privileges to dictate the choices of others to gain some sort of advantage. And while none of us can change our past, our ancestry, our genetics, or our neurology, we should be sensitive enough to not hold those traits and any trauma surrounding them against anyone. And at the same time, we should be secure enough about ourselves to not be threatened by the differences in others. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. While personality and physical traits may be important for potential partners, the real issues come into play outside of our personal relationships. When it comes to employers, educators, landlords, investors, governing bodies, and so on, there's an expectation that they will place greater value on qualities such as our abilities of competence, dependence, education, expertise, health status, intelligence, medical history, resilience, and talent, or on communication, our articulation, charisma, collaboration, eloquence, influence, our language or our accent, reliability, adherence to social norms, confidence, credibility and credit score, criminal record, dependability, discretion, economic standing, gullibility, integrity, reputation, responsibility, supportive, and utility or efficacy. These traits directly impact merit, and any of these traits can be developed through training, practice, and hard work. Now, that's not to say that it will be the same amount of work for each person, but it's supposed to be within everyone's reach. Now, disabilities and income inequalities and biases held by others may make it harder for some people to develop these traits. And this gets to the heart of the topic for this video. The modern conservatives' idea of a merit-based system attempts to reframe bigotry as a human right. On one hand, they claim the right to discriminate, and on the other, they claim that denying the existence of diversity is the only fair approach. It's like the political equivalent of saying, I don't see color. And while that sounds all fine and good, it's a bit naive and minimizes the struggle of those who are at a disadvantage. Now, looking again at the document for Project 2025, we see how they have twisted reality to justify their claim to cruelty. For example, throughout the 920-page document, they use the disabled population as a manipulative tool, feigning their concern for us while taking away our rights. It's absolute virtue signaling. On page 349, they claim the entire Department of Education should be eliminated because local agencies are better equipped to provide education for disabled students. But the reality is that this would eliminate free access to public education for disabled children and would put additional financial strain on families by forcing them to enroll their disabled children into private schools. On page 369, they claim racial discrimination is hurting disabled rights, so we should ignore race when determining eligibility for education. As if that will change anything, let alone do anything for disabled rights. Again, this is an attempt to hide the fact that racism exists, so they can eliminate penalties for racial discrimination. On pages 483, 490, and 495 to 498, they use the term disabled to refer to how Medicare affects the market, hoping to justify reducing competition for private companies. Essentially, they are claiming that Medicare disables the market, so it should be eliminated. But Medicare is a huge safety net for the elderly and actually disabled people. On pages 507, 526, 529, and 618, they claim that abortions should be banned because people are having them to eliminate pregnancies of disabled children. As if they really cared. Meanwhile, conservatives have been pushing for in vitro identification of autism so they can eliminate those pregnancies if so desired. The current health secretary is even suggesting that we track autistic people and is actively working on eliminating autism and its causes. That's eugenics. At the same time, they are discounting the rights of the mother, whose life apparently matters less than the clumps of cells being argued about. So while they are pandering for sympathy of the disabled children, they are betraying the entire disabled community by working on ways to reduce or eliminate funding for disabled programs. On pages 75, 103, 108 to 109, 614 to 616, 619 to 620, and 648, they plan to fully eliminate the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or EEOC, which provides protections to minority groups and marginalized groups to ensure we are not denied employment opportunities or discriminated against at work. On pages 316 to 317, 483, 490, 495 to 498, 506 to 508, 679, 729, and 743. They plan to reduce funding for Medicare, which supplements income for the elderly and disabled, who are more likely to be denied work or paid less in the workplace. Now, Project 2025 tries to assert that Medicare uses reimbursement schemes to undercut pricing for providers and that this hinders the provider's ability to provide quality care, page 483. They attempt to justify this, saying providers would rather refer patients somewhere else than deal with Medicare's restrictive prices. This is not only untrue, it is a gross misrepresentation of the integrity of our medical health providers. They also try to assert that Medicare penalizes investors by restricting drug and treatment options to only a few generics or only a few service codes. That's on pages 490 and 495 to 498. All insurers do this to keep costs low because everyone knows that some products and services are way overpriced. The answer is not to make sure to pay all companies whatever is charged, but to push against price gouging. If anything, this is an argument for universal health care by eliminating competitive pricing altogether and ensuring everyone gets high-quality care. The crazy continues on pages 110, 274, 513, and 743, where they plan to reduce funding for Social Security, which is a financial safety net for retirees, the disabled, and their families, funded by a percentage of our earnings while we are working. It can be construed from the language on these pages that they also plan to do the same for Medicaid, which helps millions of low and middle-income Americans pay for health care. On pages 359 and 360, they plan to reduce funding for the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services, or OSERS, which provides special education to millions of children and adults with disabilities. On pages 354, 359, 364, and 382, they plan to reduce funding for the Individuals with Disabilities Act, or IDEA, which ensures children with disabilities receive a free, appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. As mentioned earlier, this change would force families to seek private education for their disabled children, which is not economically reasonable for many families. On pages 354 and 507, they plan to reduce funding for the Rehabilitation Act, which prohibits discrimination based on disability and ensures equal access to education, employment, and healthcare for disabled people. On pages 354, 359, 364, and 382, they suggest re-segregating schools by separating disabled students from their non-disabled peers, essentially establishing two classes of citizens, one that deserves free education and another that does not. On page 538, they suggest installing political appointees to handle the FHA, which promotes fair housing for elderly and disabled citizens. Essentially, they are promoting nepotism and cronyism instead of meritocracy when it comes to regulating the housing industry. And despite Republican denial that there was any merit to Project 2025, pun intended, many of these changes have already been put into action. And while I've focused on the disabled population, Project 2025 also eliminates protections for the elderly, immigrants, women, the LGBTQ community, and more. This underscores that Christian conservatives have somehow lost sight of what really matters. Instead of success being conditioned on effort or merit, as they've claimed, they are attempting to condition it on Christian faith. They only want opportunities to be available to a narrowly defined group, and they've justified it as a mandate coming from their God. You may think it's unfair of me to single out Christian conservatives this way, but it's true. They laid it out in their mission statement. You can find it on page 581. It reads, "At the heart of the conservative promise is the resolve to reclaim the role of each American worker as the protagonist in his or her own life." And this is selling us the idea that working is a right for all Americans and is tying it to our own personal efforts, common in the modern conservative understanding of meritocracy. and to restore the family as the centerpiece of American life. This is a Christian talking point, of course referring to one man, one woman, and their biological children born either male or female, no exceptions. Though subtle, the Christian definition of a family is assumed here, excluding all other family structures, because the Heritage Foundation is a Christian organization, and Project 2025, which they wrote, is known to be a Christian nationalist playbook. The role that labor policy plays in that promise is twofold. Give workers the support they need for rewarding, well-paying, and self-driven careers. Sounds like support of diversity, equity, and inclusion, but then returns back to the value of self-driven to emphasize meritocracy. Do people require help, or do they need to help themselves? Can we do both? And restore the family supporting job as the centerpiece of the American economy. Again, we can assume this is only for families under the Christian definition. The Judeo-Christian tradition, stretching back to Genesis, has always recognized fruitful work as integral to human dignity. So opportunities based on effort is a good example of meritocracy, but they're claiming that this is only a Judeo-Christian tradition, excluding Muslims, Buddhists, Zoroastrians, atheists, and what have you. So it's meritocracy unless you're different from them. As a service to God, framing working privileges as Christian rights given to those who are obedient to the Christian God. All others will be damned. Neighbor and family. I think it's safe to assume that they mean the Christian definitions of neighbor and family apply here as well. And Americans have long been known for their work ethic, reaffirming a merit-based system is the American way and inferring any other system is un-American. While it is primarily the culture's responsibility to affirm the dignity of work, this is intended to justify rehabilitation and work incentives, no handouts for the needy. Our federal labor and employment agencies have an important role to play by protecting workers. In other words, they are attempting to gaslight us into believing this isn't discriminatory. It's for our protection. It's for the greater good. Setting boundaries for the healthy functioning of labor markets. Because the market is what matters most, not the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness, and they reserve the right to put roadblocks in your way to maintain the health of the market as they see fit. And ultimately encouraging wages and conditions for jobs that can support a family. Again, it's probably safe to say this is referring to the Christian definition of a family, excluding all others, and it is emphasizing the importance of work and rehabilitation efforts over anything they would consider a handout. And this leads me to my next point. Social Security was originally created as a means of supplementing income for those who have retired, and was later expanded to include those who were forced into early retirement due to disability. Once again, conservatives are asserting work and rehabilitation efforts should be prioritized over disability benefits. See pages 75, 108, and 638. Completely disregard the stigma and prejudice that stands in our way, and they're suggesting any lack of employment for disabled people is our own fault somehow. They're happy to base the denial of benefits on merits that they can't point to, but refuse to extend opportunities unless we meet their standards of worthiness that are influenced by their narrow religious views. Every time this has been attempted, it ended up putting a tremendous strain on the Social Security Administration, and we've gone back and forth several times. For instance, in 1948 and 1954, 1960, 1972, 1973, 1980, and 1999. And it should be noted that in 1967, the rehabilitation requirement was removed completely for disabled persons over 18, which allowed more people to claim benefits. Then incentives for encouraging rehabilitation were added back in 1973 after the Vietnam War because a large influx of disabled soldiers returned home and needed assistance rejoining the workforce. But many of those disabilities were not permanent. Therefore, rehabilitation made sense. More work incentives were added in 1980. Then in 1990, Title I of the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, was passed, which became the primary legislation providing disabled citizens with rights and protections. Throughout the history of this country, politicians have gone back and forth about whether people deserve basic securities if they don't work for them. And inevitably, those who can't work for them due to disability get lost in the shuffle, resulting in policies that unfairly target and harm the disabled community. I know I've covered a lot in this video, but let's wrap things up. DEI is inherently aware of the complexities of the human condition. DEI acknowledges the existence of our biases, whether conscious or unconscious, and suggests that we take steps to find a better balance of opportunities as opposed to pretending those differences don't exist and taking no actions to make things better. This is precisely why DEI is so important, because humans tend to be tribal, and we will instinctively be attracted to the road of least resistance. It's harder to learn about and understand differences, which makes us naturally more accepting of ourselves and people like us. But such a perspective is precisely what has kept marginalized populations in the margins. It's kept all the unhealthy unhealthy and kept the impoverished in poverty. Now, luckily, DEI has attempted to raise our laws to a higher standard by circumventing our most basic impulses. So to answer the question I asked at the beginning, if both sides of the issue are interested in fair access to opportunities, why the debate? Well, I think it's safe to say that the people who support DEI are also completely fine with true meritocracy. These two concepts can work together. It doesn't have to be meritocracy or DEI. We can have both. But we are more than willing to allow people to pursue happiness and prosperity to the best of their ability and provide supports for those who struggle along the way and ensure they are not cheated or taken advantage of. However, those who support the modern conservative use of meritocracy are under the impression that opportunities are and should be limited, and they are determined not to compete for those opportunities with anyone who is different. Despite claiming in their mission statement to provide supports people need to achieve rewarding, well-paying, and self-driven careers, unquote, they are eliminating programs that do just that. And that is why DEI is needed. Without DEI, those of us in the margins would continue to be marginalized and denied opportunities because of the sanctimonious beliefs of one group. Despite our merit, we would be denied opportunities because we are different. So don't be afraid of DEI. Embrace it. Let's try to be less exclusive and more inclusive of everyone. There's more than enough pie to go around, so let's make sure we all get a piece, okay? Now go out there and make it happen. And thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one. If you enjoyed this video, please comment, like, and subscribe to see more content like this. Or click on the video here to continue watching.